Good evening and welcome back to Dead Sleep True Crime for Bedtime. I'm Nancy Miller, and I'm going to say something that I never thought I would say in my lifetime. I'm Nancy Miller, and I am not a robot. I am a person, and this show is 100% made by humans. I don't use generative AI in the critical creative process of making this show. I don't rely on ChatGPT as a primary source. I don't use it to generate scripts, and I definitely don't use it to voice this show. Even the cover art for this podcast, that sleep mask on the sheets, that's my sleep mask. Those are my sheets, and I took that picture. And you could tell because it's crooked. And you want to know why I don't use generative AI? Because, like Stinger told Maverick in the movie Top Gun, "Son, your ego is writing checks your body can't cash." That, to me, is generative AI. A lot of promises, a lot of big flips in the air, but I have yet to see them safely land a MiG, if you know what I mean. I'll give you an example. Early on in this podcast, working on a case about a stalker in Australia, I turned to ChatGPT to see if it could answer a couple of basic questions just to make sure I had my facts straight. And, well, it was wrong. It was incorrect about the gender of the perpetrator. It got the names of some of the victims wrong. And when I challenged it, asking, "Are you sure?" Because I had the sources right here, it got a little sassy and told me, as AI always does, that as far as it knew, those were the facts, and remember that this was an experimental format and it didn't always get things right. But if I'd used ChatGPT as my source for those episodes, the way a lot of people are, it would have been inaccurate, and I would be accountable for that mistake, not ChatGPT. And then I had an opportunity to clone my own voice. And the promise was I would get a voice that sounded just like me. But it wasn't. When I heard the voice clone try and read something that I'd written, it sounded like I was being held hostage. It was completely disconnected from the real me. It just didn't work. And what's more, part of the pleasure of this show is in telling the story. I say all this because I've been made aware of some other true crime shows. Some very similar in name and concept. And it appears at least one of these shows is largely AI generated, from the research to the script to the voice itself. Now, it's required for online content these days to say that they are AI generated. But in content, it's presenting itself as a real person who also happens to have a scratchy voice and is named Nancy. And in the event of any confusion, it's not me. Dead Sleep is me. So when you subscribe to this show, it goes back to a real human who doesn't run ads, so you can get the best quality podcast for the most important moments at the end of your day, right before bedtime. You can support this podcast through Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Patreon. And if those aren't options for you, let me know. Shoot me an email at deadsleeppodcast@gmail.com, or you can find me at deadsleeppod on Instagram. Right, so AI can't really make a good podcast. But the creators of this technology have made some big promises about its capabilities in the future. Then it seems it either means it's going to save us all or bring us to the brink of human extinction. Which brings us to tonight's episode. A story about one of the most foremost figures in this world of AI. A man so rich and so powerful, he could own the world and control everyone in it. Well, except for one person, a woman he'd become so obsessed with. He didn't just want to know her. He wanted to own her. And when she wouldn't give him what he wanted, he decided to take it. This is a story that made headlines. A dispute between two rich and powerful people. But as I looked into this story, the deeper I got, the darker and more disturbing it got. And this might be the creepiest episode of Dead Sleep we've done yet. So I cautiously advise you to settle in for the night, get cozy under those covers, and get ready to fall dead asleep with Dead Sleep True Crime for Bedtime in an episode that's 100% factual, transformed into a true crime for bedtime story called The Movie Star and the Madman. The neighborhood of Los Feliz, or Los Feliz, depending on who you ask, is one of the most charming in Los Angeles. It's also one of the most sought after. It's the neighborhood where the younger, cooler celebrities live. Because here the houses are tasteful, not flashy, tucked away behind private gates, but not so removed it's in an ostentatious, gated community, like in Bel Air. Which was lovely for those who lived there, but terrible for people like Michael. Michael was looking for his son. But the house where his son lived was hidden behind a gate, which meant there was no getting in. He'd have to wait in his car for her to come out. It was mid-November 2023, and Michael, he'd tried to see his son many times over the last year or so. He'd come to the house back in 2022, even left a toy and a note. But he'd gotten no response. He tried other gestures, all of them futile. A father had a right to see his child, and he hoped maybe if he could see his son, and perhaps if she saw him and how hard he was trying, she'd realize they were meant to be together. No matter what she said, no matter what she did, he'd be there forever. Then, magically, that day in November, the gate opened and he spotted a car. He couldn't quite see exactly who was in there, but it appeared to be her. She was impossible to miss. Blonde, beautiful, the most perfect woman in the world. At least he thought so, and he knew he wasn't alone. So he followed her, tailed behind her in his car. Maybe she saw him, maybe she didn't. Either way, when she made it to her destination, he'd be right there. And he'd confront her. He just wanted to talk to her, get her to see things from his point of view, maybe even get a chance to hold his baby, his boy, for the first time. Would his son even know who he was? The traffic in LA is notoriously hellacious. But once outside the city, the snarl lightens up. The farther away you go, the smoother the ride. And it seemed she was going pretty far. As he drove along, Time passed, and so did the distance. 5 miles, 10 miles, 15 miles, 20 miles, 25 miles, 30 miles. 30 miles. That's an important number. The 30-mile zone marks the circumference around Los Angeles, back when Hollywood was at the center, created by union teams in film production years ago, back when much of TV and film production took place in and around LA. Once you moved outside that 30-mile zone, that's around 48 kilometers, a production was no longer considered local, and therefore production costs increased, and rates for union players, they also increased. This designation of the 30-mile zone doesn't really matter as much as it used to. There aren't nearly as many productions as there used to be. Most people only know about the 30-mile zone because of the name of the notorious gossip site and those initials, TMZ. But maybe her trip 30 miles outside of the city, maybe it meant something. The object of Michael's affection was in the industry. Big Hollywood movies. Maybe she was heading out this way to prepare for some new blockbuster. He followed the car, and when it finally parked, he got out of his car too. Maybe he hoped to get a glimpse of her, talk to her, maybe see his child, the one he fathered and never met. She'd even named the boy without his permission. A silly name. Cosmo. But when he saw the woman behind the wheel of the car, it was a shock. And that's when he realized he'd made a huge mistake. But it was too late. She'd already seen him. It wasn't clear if words were exchanged, but the end result was she was terrified. She got into her car and got the hell out of there. As soon as she could, she made a phone call. She told the person on the other end what had happened. That a man had followed her for 30 miles. That he'd confronted her, and that he was scary and likely deranged and definitely dangerous. And she was calling because this strange and dangerous man, he'd made a mistake. He'd followed the wrong woman. He mistook her for someone else. The mother of his child. His one true love and singular obsession. The woman he was looking for was her neighbor. He was looking for Scarlett. Scarlett Johansson had been in the public eye for years, on the big screen since she was a child. And in November of 2023, just shy of her 39th birthday, it was fair to say for at least the past 25 years, she'd endured all kinds of creepy, twisted things. A lifetime of men, mostly, wanting things from her. And what they couldn't have, they'd try to steal. One of the most high-profile examples of this happened a decade earlier, in 2012, back when she was married to the actor Ryan Reynolds. Her computer was hacked, and this hacker stole a trove of intimate photos. Photos she herself had taken to share with her husband, and no one else. Scarlett was just one of the many Hollywood A-listers who'd been hacked by the same scuzz. Other famous victims included Christina Aguilera and Mila Kunis. After a lengthy FBI investigation, the hacker was caught. He was a 35-year-old Florida man named Christopher Chaney. In person, he looked like a little mole with blinky eyes and a goatee. And he acted like one too, burrowing his way into their lives, nesting in the dark. Somehow he tunneled his way into their email accounts and was able to see every single email these women sent and received. Every attachment, every photo. It was like a mirror account. He saw it all. And he did this for over a year. And the most intimate stuff, the best stuff, he passed along to other scumbags like him and to scumbag websites. There were at least 50 people hacked in that high-profile case, most of them young women, and some of them so traumatized and ashamed by the stealing of those photos and them circulating on the internet. That one young actress on a family-friendly TV series said she'd contemplated suicide. Scarlett would describe in a video testimony how what happened to her had felt like a complete violation. She said she was truly humiliated and embarrassed, and she felt like Christopher Chaney's actions were perverted and reprehensible. Along with the intimate photos were confidential documents like business contracts, scripts, letters, driver's license information, and social security information. Information that easily could be leaked online and found by anyone if they looked hard enough. When he was busted, Christopher Chaney faced 60 years in prison for his hacking scheme. Ultimately, he made a plea agreement, and he was sentenced to 10 years. It's 2024 now, so he's likely out of prison. The most twisted part of all of this, that as he cried and begged for forgiveness, as he pleaded for mercy, he'd never touch a computer again. He couldn't articulate why he did what he did. It wasn't money. He apparently didn't sell the photos. He gave them away to other scumbags like him and to celebrity websites that specialized in stolen photos of famous women. Maybe he didn't want to dig deep and admit what it really was that motivated him. It wasn't the pleasure of looking at beautiful women he could never have and sharing that beauty with other men who would never have them either. It was something perhaps more sinister and disturbing than that. There was power in it, of having something everybody in the world wanted. And it was in his possession, even if it was never his to begin with. Stolen without consent. I didn't know until I started researching that this case was cracked because of Scarlett Johansson. There were anonymous complaints, but Scarlett came forward because she didn't want this to happen to other women. And it was only when she came forward and revealed what had happened to her that the FBI got involved. Without Scarlett Johansson, this case would have potentially stalled or never made it to court. A 10-year prison sentence, maybe it wasn't long enough. At the very least, this was a criminal case with clear laws that could be fought and won. For the next decade or so, however, the transgressions against her would exist in this gray area. The things that would happen to her, they were ethically or morally repugnant, but not necessarily illegal. Paparazzi hovered around a playground, taking pictures of her and her young children. They could park outside her house with tinted black windows so she couldn't see inside. One night in Hollywood, after making an appearance on Jimmy Kimmel, she and her security team were swarmed with paparazzi, so aggressive, she fled to a local police station. The cops shooed the photographers away, but nothing else happened after that. The LAPD spokesperson described Scarlett as a little spooked about the incident. In truth, she appeared a lot more than that. That night, she left the police station shaken and left to fend for herself. She would later say she feared for her safety, that this was Princess Diana-level stalking, that she feared for herself and for the lives of her children, that if something wasn't done about all of these men who were allowed to intrude upon her life, things were bound to get worse. In 2020, the pandemic appeared to offer Scarlett Johansson a respite. She quietly married writer and comedian Colin Jost from Saturday Night Live. And not long after that, in 2021, the couple welcomed a baby boy into the world. They named him Cosmo. Colin was the biological father of this child. It wasn't a question. Except in the eyes of some man, a 35-year-old named Michael, who decided that Scarlett Johansson was his girlfriend and that he'd fathered her child. It's impossible to count the number of stalkers that a lot of famous people have. Celebrities these days are more available to us than ever because of social media and the proximity that we feel to them online. There's an intimacy that could be misconstrued as a relationship. Scarlett Johansson didn't have social media, and she liked to keep her private life private. Honestly, who could blame her? Once someone hacks into your computer, steals your intimate photos, then releases all of your private information, potentially, online for anyone to see, that you would be inclined to keep a healthy separation between your professional life and your personal life. And still, she was battling a stalker. One who'd come to her house, and one who was obsessed not only with Scarlett, but with her son. She first became aware of this stalker in August of 2022, when he left a note with a child's toy outside of her house. Things escalated when he shared a photo of himself outside of Scarlett Johansson's house with another note that read, "Here I am, and where I'll be forever." He also let Scarlett Johansson know that she needed to help him out financially because he'd been forced to steal things due to lack of funds, and if she wouldn't mind, he'd really appreciate it. So not only was he a dangerous predatory stalker, he was also a shameless deadbeat. When a series of incidents happened in 2023, including the following of her neighbor thinking it was Scarlett Johansson, along with other predatory visits outside of her house, Scarlett Johansson snapped into action. She'd hired a private investigator to find out who exactly this guy was, and she managed to get a name. His name, reportedly, was Michael Joseph Branham. What she wanted to do was get a restraining order against this guy. But that process, it took time. And until then, this man, he was at large. So in 2023, that was her situation. And yes, she was a successful and beautiful movie star. But she'd been through a lot of shit. And I imagine she maybe thought she'd seen it all. But there was one more insinuation into her life. Only this time it wasn't some crazy guy in a beat-up car chasing someone 30 miles. It was a tech billionaire, beloved by all. Someone who was leading the world into a whole new generation of technology, of possibilities. His name was Sam Altman, and he was going to change the world. And to do that, he needed Scarlett Johansson. The story of Sam Altman is the story of Silicon Valley. Young men with big ideas, a lot of money, who get high on their own supply. It was 2012, and while Scarlett Johansson was working with the FBI to crack open a case of a sick perv who'd infiltrated her email and the emails of countless other A-list celebrities to exploit them and destroy their lives and ravage them of their dignity, Sam Altman had a startup that seemed at complete odds with Scarlett Johansson's needs. He had a company called Looped, L-O-O-P-T. It was an app that allowed you to share your location with people through your smartphone, which seems like a quaint idea now, but back then, it was quite novel. Just about the last person who wanted to share her location was Scarlett Johansson. But again, this was the mid-2000s, and there were all kinds of ideas, and it was all about sharing. I know this because I worked as a senior editor at Wired in the mid-2000s, and it was all about sharing. You were posting on Twitter, you were sharing on Facebook, you were checking in on Square. You were taking pictures of your coffee, you were taking pictures of your feet, you were tagging yourself. Every move, every minute of the day. The word back then was disruption, where you took old fuddy-duddy ideas, like a taxi, and turned it into a new idea called Uber. And someone who seemed to be everywhere all the time was Sam Altman. He was in his late 20s, the same age as Scarlett, with a boyish style and a large head with a furrowed brow that gave him the look of a Peanuts character. And I guess if he were a Peanuts character, he'd be Schroeder, the one that's obsessed with one thing. That's Beethoven and the piano. For Sam Altman, it was technology and how it might transform our lives. So his app, the one where you could share where you were with people through your smartphone, it might sound like humble beginnings, but it led to bigger, better things. That includes a key position at a company called Y Combinator. This startup culture felt like a lottery, that all you needed was $1 and a dream. But in truth, there was a place, a lab, where young tech entrepreneurs could develop their ideas, ensure their success. And that place was called Y Combinator. Sam was only in his 20s, but he impressed everyone at Y Combinator as a genius, a visionary, and one who had incredible leadership. He was passionate and persuasive. Sam was that rare kind of tech guy, one who had social skills and charisma. He knew how to work a room, and he knew how to get people to be on his side. Even as a kid, Sam Altman was willing to fight for what he believed in. He stood up to bullies. In high school, for instance, when some jerk was bullying a fellow student for being gay, Sam proudly stood up and told everyone that he was gay and to leave that other kid alone. In Silicon Valley, where everybody thinks they're the smartest one in the room. Sam really was the smartest one in the room. Which is why it's not quite clear how, in 2023, he could have done something so stupid. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back in Silicon Valley in 2015, there was a company at Y Combinator that captured Sam Altman's attention. The company was called OpenAI. Originally, OpenAI was a nonprofit, and it was founded by Sam Altman, Elon Musk, among other tech luminaries. And the goal of OpenAI was as it sounds: an open source, transparent research organization to ensure the beneficial and constructive use of emerging technology that is artificial intelligence. AI was developing so quickly as a technology with such incredible potential. It seemed like the responsible thing to do was treat OpenAI like a lab, that they would do this research and they would share their findings. As the practical uses of AI became more apparent, as did the dangers of what AI was capable of, OpenAI was no longer a nonprofit. They couldn't have their discoveries be out there for everyone to see and potentially do something bad with it. So they became a for-profit company, and eventually, Microsoft became one of OpenAI's biggest investors. And their signature offering was ChatGPT. Because this is Dead Sleep and I'm here to put you to sleep, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes explaining what AI is. I don't know about you, but I feel like it's become such a buzzword. AI this, AI that. Should I be afraid of it? Is it going to kill me? Is it going to cure cancer? Is it going to end poverty? Is it going to take my job? Is it going to give me a new job? Maybe I won't have to work. Can it give me a good recipe for tofu peanut sauce? How can something have such magnitude and that a lot of us don't even really know what it is? That AI is a term that gets thrown around and it's so dizzying. If we don't understand it, we just abide it or fear it. Whatever the case, let's explore what the fuck AI is. As an added bonus, the sounds you're going to hear for the next few minutes are tones set at 963 hertz. That's a frequency that's believed to be healing, calming, awakening intuition, and increasing positive energy. So in the event that none of this has any interest to you, at least you might get a secondary benefit by enjoying these next few minutes of soothing tones. Okay, ready? AI has been around for a while, and we use it in our interactions every day. It's in algorithms. Spotify recommends a song based on your past listening habits. We ask Waze or Google Maps to find us a way to get to work, and it does. The backbone of artificial intelligence has been around since the 1950s. And the term artificial intelligence was coined in 1956. If we think of intelligence not necessarily as smarts, but as logic, so it figures out problem solving. And that's the essential desire and function that we want from AI. That a computer helps solve a problem. That's it. So the part that gets more complicated as we work our way into the layers of artificial intelligence is when we get to machine learning. Machine learning, again, is a term that came from the 1950s. It's a computer or computer system that's capable of getting better at something by learning the way that humans do. And an early example of that, of artificial intelligence expressing the ability of machine learning, was the supercomputer Deep Blue. Back in the 1990s, Deep Blue was programmed to play chess. And the more it played chess, the better it got at chess. And not only did it get better at playing chess, in 1997, it figured out how to be one of the greatest chess champions in the world. And because a computer's insides are faster than a human's brain sometimes, it could figure these things out at 1,000,000 times the rate that we regular humans could. Deep Blue is playing chess into infinity, and we're just focusing on the game ahead of us. But we had no illusions about what Deep Blue was. It was a computer. It didn't seem at all like a human. Generative AI now has the capability to interact with us like a human. So the GPT in ChatGPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. You know that generative means that it can gather pre-existing information and give you a new answer based on that information. And the pre-trained means it's already devoured a whole bunch of stuff on the internet, like Ms. Pac-Man. And the transformer means that it can formulate a response based on that existing information that it has. And it generates that information to engage with you in a way that simulates, or as close as possible, a human response, using words and phrases that it knows. And in the ChatGPT world that we're in now, the reason why it can respond to us, it was programmed to treat the internet like an all-you-can-eat buffet, devouring words, books, Reddit threads, transcripts like from this podcast, say, Shakespeare, pictures, you name it. It's devoured it. And it's still hungry. The more it eats, the more accurate it becomes, the more human it seems. What people are afraid of is that next step. And that's artificial general intelligence, called AGI. It sounds so benign, artificial general intelligence. But what it means is when artificial intelligence has something that no other machine or even plant or animal appears to have. And that is an awareness with human cognition and an intelligence superior to that of human beings. And that's an intelligence and an awareness that as humans we can't control. I picture it kind of like Bam Bam on the Flintstones. This big baby that doesn't know its own strength, and it could hit us pretty hard without really trying to hurt us, but it will hurt. But that's the doomsday scenario. There are scenarios where AGI has an awareness that it can think beyond anything we ever imagined. And that's where the Sam Altmans of the world, that's where they live. That AGI can recognize human problems, and that's poverty, climate change, all of these things that we can't seem to get our shit together about. The hope is, perhaps, that AGI can work to solve those problems and then present them to us in a way that is actionable and effective for us humans to do. And for someone like Sam Altman, he saw himself as the overseer of this future, like father to Bam Bam, which means that he'd be the benevolent father to the rest of us. He would probably see this differently, but that's the impression that one might get when you're a tech genius billionaire who's also owning and driving the technology that's smarter and more powerful than any other human, presumably except you. There are a lot of skeptics. And if it even happens, AGI is a long way off. And right now, most of us enjoy ChatGPT as a way to find the perfect gym workout or a homework assignment, or maybe even write code. Sam Altman and his team understood that in the next iteration of ChatGPT, this iteration would talk. This was a breakthrough, and they needed a voice that people would be comfortable with, because ChatGPT wouldn't be Siri. It would sound more human than anything that came before. So generative AI is what it is. It's a tool. It likes to eat as much data as it can, and it does what it's told. And that's it. So a problem, of course, isn't the technology. It's in the lack of protection for the people who created the original stuff, the original song, the original book, the original recipe, whatever it is. So when we ask for something and ChatGPT serves it back to us, the question is, where did it come from? Who does it belong to? Do the original creators get compensated? Is it a new thing if it's been generated by AI? How do we regulate or train the technology to recognize and protect the original creators, the people that made the stuff? And how do we ensure what's put out there is ethical and accurate? Because Sam Altman was aware of people's feelings about AI, their fears, their skepticism, and overall ick factor. And he had to find a way to get people more comfortable with the idea of AI, even just as simple as something as ChatGPT. Because if he could get them comfortable with ChatGPT, then people would be more willing to accept these future iterations and advancements of AI. So how would you do that? How do you make people comfortable, personally, socially, culturally, with a machine? Sam needed to look no further than a movie that starred Scarlett Johansson, and it came out in 2013. Evidently, it was one of his favorite movies. It was called Her. And you may know the movie, and it may be a while since you've seen it. But Her is about a not too distant future where people interact with technology as if it is human. And in the instance of this movie, it focuses on a character played by Joaquin Phoenix, who's a lonely 30-something single guy. And so he introduces a digital voice into his life. More than a voice, it's a computer-generated woman. He can't see her, he can't touch her, but he can hear her. And he falls in love with her. And that voice was played beautifully, exquisitely by Scarlett Johansson, which gave Sam an idea. He apparently thought to himself, she's just the voice I need to make ChatGPT a success. It was the fall of 2023, and at that time, Scarlett Johansson had a lot on her mind. She had a husband, a young toddler, a new movie in the works, a stalker at large, and she received a request. The request from OpenAI, from Sam Altman, asking for her services. Would she be interested in reprising her role from a movie that she did 10 years ago called Her? and lend her husky, smooth voice to the future of technology. An opportunity like no other. Her voice would make people more at ease, get them comfortable with this whole new world of artificial intelligence and its capabilities. There were big plans for OpenAI, and Scarlett and her voice would help get them there. It wasn't just an overglorified Siri. She'd help change the world. Those weren't the exact words in the email, but that was the gist. And considering all that it would take, and considering the potential impact on her career, I imagine, and on top of that, she might have been thinking, what has the internet ever done for me? I've been stalked, cyber harassed. I've had intimate pictures in my entire life stolen and exposed online. Not to mention how streaming services have completely cannibalized the film industry. After all that I've been through, do I want to put my voice out there for anyone to hear and for anyone to use and for anyone to have and to own? I can't say that's what she was thinking, but I certainly would understand if that was what she was thinking. And so she said no. Sam was not accustomed to people saying no. And in Silicon Valley culture, you don't take no for an answer. And he was known for being charming and persuasive. He'd gotten ahead by getting people to see his side, getting them to say yes. And in the past, he would do whatever it took to get people to agree with him and to align with him and to say yes. He even got fired from his own company, from OpenAI, as CEO, by a group of people who found him to be manipulative and deceitful. And he managed to not only get rehired, the majority of the people who had decided to kick him out, they were pushed out. This was all featured in an incredible podcast by Bloomberg called Foundering. Ultimately, despite his efforts, Scarlett Johansson said no. And that, it seemed, was that. Months went by. Scarlett was dealing with her stalker, among other things. She wasn't even thinking about OpenAI or ChatGPT until she received an email from Sam. It was a few days before they were launching their talking ChatGPT. And in his email, he begged her to reconsider. Was she sure she didn't want to be a part of this opportunity and voice their system? And again, she said no. And again, it seemed that was that. But oh no, it wasn't. There was one more surprise coming Scarlett's way. At a big event in May of 2024, OpenAI was about to do a huge unveiling of their new ChatGPT model. And there were a variety of voices that they had now had. You can choose any type of voice that you want. But the one that Sam was most excited about was a voice that he called Sky. Only when he tweeted out his excitement about the introduction of this voice, Sky, he didn't say the name Sky. He tapped out 3 letters in lowercase that spelled her, which suggested, at least to most people who saw the tweet and to Scarlett Johansson herself, that this suggested that Scarlett Johansson was the voice of Skye. And when Scarlett Johansson and the rest of the world heard what Skye sounded like, she was sickened to hear that it sounded exactly like her. At first, it seemed like maybe they somehow aggregated all of her movies and synthesized her voice that way. It was so close. Scarlett Johansson was livid. She and her legal team shot off a letter to OpenAI, and they made a statement to the press. She outlined everything that had happened, their correspondence, the request, that she'd said no, and somehow they still came out with a voice called Skye that sounded so much like her own family thought it was Scarlett. The team at OpenAI vehemently denied it. This wasn't Scarlett Johansson. It wasn't supposed to sound like Scarlett Johansson. They had no idea what she was talking about, and they'd hired this voice actress because they liked her voice. It had nothing to do with the movie Her. But Scarlett, she'd saved the receipts. She had those emails from Sam Altman. And Sam Altman, for being a really smart guy, did the stupidest thing a CEO could possibly do, and gloated, tweeting out Her, bragging like he owned Scarlett Johansson, but he didn't. If this went to court, that was some pretty damning evidence that that voice was inspired by Scarlett Johansson's character in that movie. The question was, did Scarlett Johansson have a case? Ironically, what happened to her is what's been happening to a lot of artists, voiceover actors, writers, a number of creative people who put their stuff out there online. It's been co-opted, synthesized, reproduced, and exported by ChatGPT and other platforms without attribution or credit or protection. So it was unclear if she had a case because it wasn't technically Scarlett Johansson. So this was a gray area, like a crime of tomorrow, something we're going to have to confront soon, but the laws just aren't there yet. Though there was an example of precedent that had been set in a similar case that involved Bette Midler years earlier. She'd been approached by some company to voice a commercial, and she declined, only for that commercial to appear with a Bette Midler sound-alike that was so convincing people thought it was her. Bette Midler sued, and she won. It's unclear if Scarlett Johansson in this day and age would be able to make the same case. For creative people, it's uncharted territory. And the fight is just beginning. Scarlett wasn't the first, and she won't be the last. So that was that. At least for now. And that happened May 20th, 2024. 3 days later, Scarlett had to confront a whole other legal problem. It was personal, and it was dead serious. Scarlett Johansson was in court, trying to get a restraining order served, finally, to the man who was stalking her. When she showed up in court, she got some bad news. Michael, that man who had claimed to be the father of her child, he couldn't be found. Her lawyer tried to serve him papers to appear in court, and he couldn't track him down. The day that she had to physically be in court, in the same room with the man who was stalking her and her family. The guy didn't show, and the case was dropped. At least for now, until this guy can be found, serve those papers, appear in court with Scarlett Johansson, and establish a restraining order to keep him out of her life, or at least within a certain amount of distance between her and her family. And as of now, in August of 2024, she still doesn't have that restraining order. And that man is still out there, this case unresolved. Which lends some perspective to this whole ChatGPT stuff. Up in Silicon Valley, Sam Altman can claim he wants to save the world. Scarlett Johansson just wants to live her life and keep her family safe. Where's the AI for that? Thank you for listening to Dead Sleep True Crime for Bedtime. I'll be back next week with a whole new story, probably shorter. Until then, sleep well and nighty-night.